Good morning, everyone. I would hope to begin in about 1 minute if you would like to take your places. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I hope you had a very productive and useful evening. We have a lot to get through today, so I'd like to begin by asking Secretariat just to make a few announcements, and then we'll take the reports from the working groups. So, Secretariat, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to announce that the informal contact group discussing the COP-appointed counselors will meet immediately after this session in the SIGA room. Second, the working groups and our document team have been very busy, so there are a large number of CRPs now posted in all 3 languages to the website. I will read them out so that everyone is aware of exactly which ones are posted. CRP 17, CMS Contribution to the Global Biodiversity Forum. CRP 20, Atlas on Animal Migration. CRP 27.1.2, Fish Aggregating Devices. CRP 27.1.3, Maltreatment and Mutilation of Seabirds in Fisheries. 27.2.1, Marine Pollution. 27.2.2, Marine Noise. 27.2.3, Vessel Strikes. 27.3.1, Recreation in water interactions. 27.4.1, important marine mammals areas. 28.5.1, action plan for birds. 29.2.2, Sahelo-Saharan megafauna. 29.4.1, endorsement of the African Elephant Action Plan. 30.1.2, Aquatic Wild Meat and Action Plan. And then lastly, the daily report for day 2 is posted as well. And then lastly, there was an intervention in the afternoon session concerning the variable use of subject to available resources, subject to the availability of external resources. The practice in this convention has been to use the phrase subject to the availability of external resources. Our proposal is to use that phrase and after the meeting, so that we're not busy making corrections right now, revise the text wherever we see inconsistencies so that it consistently uses the phrase subject to the availability of external resources. Of course, the decision is yours, and if you prefer to use a different phrase, then we need to have that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat, for that. I'll let you consider the report that we heard, and we'll come back to that later in the day for any comments. Just on CRPs, my intention is to have a session tomorrow morning to go through the CRPs that are available at that point. I think it's important that where we can, to give you time to look at CRPs to make sure that you are content with their content, if that's acceptable to you. What I'd like to do then is ask for reports from working groups, and if I could start with the credentials group, please. Yes, United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Credentials Committee met again this morning to review an additional 3 sets of credentials. 2 were assessed as valid, which takes the total to 68 sets of credentials so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United Kingdom. Could I check if there are any other reports from the other working groups on progress or any issues that you'd like to raise at this point? New Zealand, please, first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to report back on the institutional and cross-cutting working group meeting that we had yesterday at lunchtime. We met yesterday to discuss the strategic plan, and we had a very productive meeting. We worked through all the relevant documents in the 2 hours we had available, and we are, I think, 98% there. There were a few minor outstanding issues that the EU is going to discuss at coordination this morning. So I don't think there's any need for a further meeting. We'll be able to resolve those issues in the margins, and the plan is to have a CRP finalised sometime today. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand, and thank you for that excellent news that you have made good progress. We'll receive the CRP in due course. Thank you. Scientific Council, I think, is it the Aquatic Group?
Okay, thank you very much. Aquatics made some pretty good progress over the couple of times we've met. We've dealt with 27.1.1 bycatch, 27.1.2 fish aggregating devices, 27.1.3 mutilation of seabirds, 27.2.1 effects of marine pollution on migratory species, 27.2.2 marine noise, 27.2.3 vessel strikes, 27.3.1 recreational in-water interactions, and 27.4.1 important marine mammal areas. CRPs, as just announced, have been prepared for all of those, with the exception of 27.1 bycatch, which we're about 98% there. So I imagine we'll finish that one off when we meet at lunchtime with a bit of luck. And straight after, when we get into the meeting, we're then going to focus on 27.2.4 deep sea mining, which I know is an issue of relevance to a lot of parties here. So that's my report, but while we have the microphone, I'll pass on to my colleagues on cross-cutting.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. We considered a series of documents yesterday in the afternoon session. I report on document 21, Rev 1 on conservation status of migratory species. There was a positive discussion and agreement was found, and CRP will be produced and offered for consideration. And I pass over to Ruth Croming.
Thank you very much. Just to report then on the final 2 documents that were discussed at that working group yesterday evening. Document 15.1 on the restructuring of the Scientific Council. It's a very constructive discussion, good progress on the text, and the discussion will continue today as we're awaiting confirmation of one fairly straightforward outstanding issue on number of scientific councillors. The second document, document 30.4.3 on wildlife disease, we had some preliminary, very constructive and also supportive discussion. As we didn't have text to consider, we have decided then that we will work on this document again, and we will attend to that then this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for these reports. Could I check if there are any other reports at this stage? Yes, is it the avian group? Yes, Scientific Council, if you're ready to give your report, if the microphones are working.
Yes, now. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, to be brief, the Avian Working Group made very good progress yesterday. We're close to finalising discussions on many documents, including 28.1 on the legal killing, taking and trade, 28.2 on the action plan for migratory land birds in the African and Asian region, and also 28.3 on preventing poisoning. So far we have one CRP that's been produced on action plans for birds, and this afternoon we'll be finalising the documents I just mentioned and starting our discussions on flyways and the Central Asian flyway.
Thank you very much for that update. If there are no other reports, I've still got a request from the Scientific Council. I'm not sure if that's the historic one. Alfred, and terrestrial, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a brief report from the Terrestrial Working Group. The group agreed with the recommendations in 7 documents without making any changes and recommending their adoption. The group also made amendments to 2 documents that will come to the Committee of the Whole as conference rules papers, and also discussed amendments to 1 document that required further consultation among delegations, and this will be discussed again at the next session of the Terrestrial Working Group this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alfred, from the Terrestrial Group. That's very helpful updates. Thank you all. Let's return then to the agenda for today. You'll recall that we were slightly behind time yesterday in terms of some of the issues that we still need to cover, so I intend to go back and start on item 30.4.1, which is climate change. Before I do that, could I encourage you in your interventions to keep them to the point, keep them focused on the text, and if there are any changes that you'd like to propose to the text, outline these in summary and then send them into the Secretariat. I do want to make up time today if we possibly can, so I will close lists fairly quickly on the basis that we really need to catch up on time. But let's see how we go through the day. Can we start then with item 30.4.1 on climate change, and the UK Scientific Councillor will introduce this item. United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I hand over to my colleague to introduce this text, there were a few issues we wanted to raise. Firstly, we are hoping, and we're very grateful to the Secretariat for setting out what they see.
Please turn off the other microphones which are not being used.
On the external resources, but we'd be very grateful if the Secretariat can clarify what this means to them. So what is considered external resources? Is this the voluntary budget, or is this something else? I think it would be really good if we all had the same understanding of this. And we also believe that it would be really good to be clear on where the Secretariat believes this caveat is necessary to include within the papers, as we're seeing different approaches being taken on different papers in different working groups. For example, if this language is necessary when setting out what activities we're asking the scientific council to take up. In some discussions, we've seen the suggestion that we don't need this language. In other places, this language is still there. So I think it'd be really good if that could be set out for all parties at another session. Also, regarding the CRPs, we recognize the tremendous amount of work required to prepare these documents, and we are very grateful for the Secretariat for this work. However, there were concerns raised in our regional meeting this morning about whether or not these documents include proposals from non-parties, which have not been endorsed by parties during the sessions. And we've noted that without amendments being shown in track changes, or with some other highlighting, it's very difficult to identify what amendments have been made. So we'd appreciate if there was some clarity about what has been incorporated into the CRPs and how we will address that when they come back to this body. Thank you very much. With that, I'm happy to hand over to my colleague to introduce the climate change document.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, under the agenda item 30.4.1, the United Kingdom wishes to introduce the document on climate change and migratory species. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council following discussions in an intersessional working group. Rev 3 of the document contains edits undertaken after the document was reviewed by the 6th meeting of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council in 2003. The document contains 2 annexes. Annex 1 contains a revision to Resolution 12.21, showing both revisions and draft clean text. The revised resolution has 2 annexes. Firstly, a recasting of the previous programme of work into actions that could be taken by parties and other stakeholders. Secondly, a new annex which provides a decision framework to provide guidance to the parties on implementation of paragraph 9 of Resolution 12.21 as requested in Decision 13.140. Annex 2 of the paper contains draft decisions for the forthcoming triennium and includes the draft terms of reference for a CMS Scientific Council Working Group on Climate Change and Migratory Species. There is also a related information document, UNEP CMS COP14 INF 30.4.1, which contains the summary of a report published at United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP28. Climate Change and Migratory Species, a review of impacts, conservation actions, ecosystem services and indicators. The report was commissioned by the Government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland through the Joint Nature Conservation Committee as a significant contribution to the work of CMS and to raise global awareness about the impacts of climate change on migratory species that are already being observed. And some of you were present at the side event yesterday lunchtime where some of that was passed. I do have a few copies of the summary report available if anybody is interested. In terms of the document, highlights that changes in climatic conditions are happening faster than previously anticipated. The impacts of these changes on migratory species are becoming more serious, less predictable, and harder to mitigate. Given the urgency with which CMS must further engage in work on climate change, it is proposed that Resolution 12.21 be revised to update it to current circumstances and new decisions be adopted for the triennium between the 14th and 15th conferences of the parties. Therefore, in terms of actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to take note of the information document, INF 30.4.1, adopt the draft amendments to Resolution 12.21 contained in Annex 1 of the document, including both of the annexes to the resolution, adopt the draft decisions contained in Annex 2 of this document, and to delete decisions 13.126 to 13.128. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom, for that. Just before I open the floor, in terms of the earlier comments from the United Kingdom, I have asked the Secretariat to consider these and will report back probably after, probably after lunchtime. It may be useful to have further discussions at that point in time. Can I then open the floor on the climate change issue, if there are any comments? Thank you. I've got Brazil, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor, and good morning to all delegations and Secretariat and all. We thank the Scientific Council for reporting on document 30.4.1. The agenda of climate change is a priority for our country, and we are very honored to host the 13th Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC to be held in 2025 in the city of Belém. As our President Lula mentioned, we expect this COP to be different for all the others, since we'll have the chance to discuss the importance of biodiversity for climate in a mega-diverse country. We are going to discuss the problems of IPLCs, looking at the indigenous peoples and local communities. We're going to debate on the issues related to riverside peoples, talk to them, and seeing how they live. With that in mind, we can only express our support for the document prepared by the Scientific Council on the impacts of climate change on migratory species. However, we ask your indulgence to suggest a few minor language amendments to the draft decisions proposed. On the proposed revision to Resolution 12.21, we suggest that the reference to small island developing states in page 18 of the document be preceded by the term including, in order to align the language with that adopted in other instruments on climate change. On draft decision 14 DD item G, page 29 of the document, the reference to the Paris Agreement should be changed to the Paris Agreement adopted under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, on the grounds that the former is not a separate instrument from the UNFCCC. Similarly, the reference to the Paris Agreement in item 2B on page 31 should be changed to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement adopted thereunder. We will send our comments to the Secretary as soon as Wi-Fi is available. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Very helpful. South Africa, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. South Africa takes note of the information document on climate change and migratory species. However, with regard to the proposed recommendation on the report, South Africa will also like to make additional input on recommendation, in particular to add ecosystem-based adaptation, where there is reference to nature-based solutions consistent with CBD and UNFCCC language. We have submitted our detailed inputs in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Could I go to European Union, please?
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states thank the CMS Secretariat for the work on climate change and migratory species, and in particular welcome the review process, which has provided a good view on possible solutions and actions to parties to address climate change and its impact on migratory species. The EU and the member states have taken this into consideration from the beginning, mainstreaming climate in our internal EU legislation on the protection of migratory species, such as the Bird and Habitats Directive that underpin our Natura 2000 network. And we are convinced It is necessary to ramp up this work at the international level, since climate knows no frontiers and by definition neither do migratory routes. And for that reason, the EU and its member states propose to strengthen the language in the documents for consideration by the COP. In particular, we would like to see more ambition on 3 particular concepts. Firstly, nature-based solutions are one of the most important tools to address climate change and biodiversity loss jointly. They are part of the key messages out of the review process, but they are not adequately referenced in the proposed text. Secondly, in order to jointly address both global threats in a successful manner, it is imperative to make the most of potential synergies with the work done under other conventions, such as the UNFCCC and CBD, but also under other bodies, such as the IPCC and IPBES. And finally, we also find it important that the issue of climate change is taken into account in national strategies and plans for the conservation of migratory species and their migratory routes. And we will provide these comments in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. If I could then go to New Zealand, and then I'll come to IFOP. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, firstly, we'd like to thank the UK for funding and undertaking these reviews and for the reports produced during the intersessional period. And thanks also to the Sessional Committee for their work. This is an important piece of work about the worrying impacts of climate change on migratory species and a priority issue for New Zealand. Climate change impacts are already being felt by migratory species in our region and causing significant mortality events. For example, storm impacts like landslides have had detrimental effects on nesting sites for our seabirds. Mitigation and adaptation will be needed to protect both our migratory species and at-risk communities, especially Pacific nations on low-lying islands, from the rapidly changing climate. As the EU have just said, the synergies across international organisations are very important as well. New Zealand supports the revised resolution and draft decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand, and we saw some examples of that at a side event yesterday in terms of the damage that's already been done by climate change to migratory bird populations. Thank you. Could I call on IFOP, please?
Thank you, Chair. IFOR is making this statement on behalf of 15 other organisations. The full list has been provided to the Secretariat. As the State of Migratory Species report emphasises, the impact of climate change is already being felt by many migratory species, on land, in the ocean and in the air. And the role of climate change as a direct threat to biodiversity is expected to increase considerably in coming years. Therefore, the work of this convention and its parties to address these impacts on migratory species and their habitats is crucial. However, as also demonstrated by the many recent scientific publications and the report by CMS on climate change released at Climate COP14 and referenced by the UK just now, many migratory species, including cetaceans, forest elephants and shark species listed on CMS, can play a significant role in maintaining and enhancing the integrity of ecosystems and enabling them to sequester and store more carbon. Yet this role in natural climate mitigation is not widely recognised, particularly in international forums. We need to change the narrative from wildlife as purely victims of climate change to one where we also see them as our key allies. CMS is perfectly placed to champion this narrative and inspire action that delivers synergistically across CMS, the CBD and Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. This role, of course, is just one of the many co-benefits to restoring populations of migratory species, including wider biodiversity recovery and ecosystem resilience in the face of climate change. Our organisations therefore welcome the update to the resolution, its annex with the advice to parties on priority actions, and the draft decisions and terms of reference for the Climate Change Working Group, all of which now include recognition of the important role migratory species can play in mitigating climate change. They need to better understand this role and to promote it, and to take action in concert with related MEAs. We therefore urge parties to adopt the document. Additionally, Chair, we would like to thank you for all the work you have done as COP-appointed councillor for climate change over recent years, and note that we will soon welcome a new person to this role, and we wish them and you well and look forward to working with them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IFO, for that, and personally, thank you. Senegal, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Senegal supports the adoption of this document and the amendments tabled by the EU and South Africa, particularly as regards nature-based solutions. I should simply like to recall that our country, Senegal, as part of the UNFCCC, has produced a document on nationally determined contributions in the field of biodiversity. This document is entitled Assessment of Vulnerability of the Biodiversity Sector in Terms of Climate and Adaptation to Climate Change as part of the nationally determined contributions. We're fully aware of the negative effects of climate change on migratory species and their habitats. The loss of breeding sites, the disruption of migratory cycles, particularly for some species which are particularly vulnerable to climate change, such as marine turtles, who we're seeing losing their breeding sites along the coastal areas. Rising temperatures also have effects on reptile species, with trends being seen at a significant level. This is a document that we support, and we would also urge other countries to support it.
Thank you, Senegal. Maldives, I will close, I think, after Maldives, and then move to the next item. So Maldives, please.
Thank you, Chair. Maldives welcomes the document 30.4.1 Rev 3 on climate change and migratory species. We support the adoption of draft amendments to Resolution 12.21 contained in Annex 1 of this document and to adopt the draft decisions contained in Annex 2 of this document. We want to highlight the need for understanding baseline conditions for degraded areas for restoration that would benefit migratory species. In revised Annex 1 to Resolution 12.21, we want to add an additional point under measures to facilitate species adaptation in response to climate change. This would be undertake baseline studies to understand the degraded areas where conservation efforts need to be prioritized. This will be above the point 4, undertake the restoration of degraded habitats and landscapes or seascapes. This is because in the Maldives currently we do not have any idea of the percentage degraded areas, and understanding this baseline is critical for conservation planning for migratory species. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for focusing so well on the text. I'll take one final comment then from Fauna and Flora, please.
Thank you, Chair. While welcoming and supporting Resolution 12.21 and intervention by IFO on behalf of 15 organizations, Fauna and Flora would like to underline that local communities are uniquely placed to play an important role in climate mitigation and adaptation because of their proximity to wildlife and their local knowledge. And the Common Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework recognizes the critical role of local communities. So we encourage parties to strengthen the synergy between CMS and the Global Biodiversity Framework. Therefore, Fauna and Flora urge parties to reinstate paragraph 26 of the preamble of the resolution on the full involvement of indigenous people and local communities in planning and implementing effective activities to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And acknowledging the CMS Scientific Council comment, Fauna and Flora suggests adding to operative paragraph in Resolution 12.21, aligned to preamble paragraphs, urging parties and non-parties to ensure the full involvement of indigenous people and local communities in development and implementation of climate mitigation and adaptation, which includes incorporating local knowledge system and practices in addressing climate change effects, as well as collecting data about the most affected sites across migratory species routes and where climate mitigation and adaptation measures are required. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, everyone, for all these comments. I think clearly some may be substantive, so we should refer it to the working group for their deliberations and to bring it back as a CRP. Thank you very much. If we could then move on to item 30.4.2, which is insect decline and its threat to migratory insectivorous animal populations, and the Secretariat will introduce this item. Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, and good morning, distinguished delegates. Under the agenda item 30.4.2, the Secretariat wishes to introduce the document UNEP CMS COP14, document 30.4.2 Ref 1, insect decline and its threat to migratory insectivorous animal populations. This document was prepared by the Secretariat with input from the Scientific Council. The document contains two annexes. Annex 1 presents the key messages and recommendations of the review Insect Decline and its Threat to Migratory Insectivorous Animal Populations. This review has been prepared by the Leibniz Institute for the Analysis of Biodiversity Change, thanks to generous voluntary contributions from the governments of Germany and Australia, and it's available as an information document, UNEP CMS COP14 in 30.4.2. The COP document further contains Annex 2 with draft decisions on insect decline and its threat to migratory insectivorous animal populations. Revision 1 of the document corrects an error in the title of the document and adds a proposal to delete the current decision 13.129, which has been implemented and should possibly be replaced by a new decision as proposed in the document. In summary, the document reports on the progress in the implementation of Decision 13.129, insect decline and its threat to migratory insectivorous animal populations. The document proposes draft decisions that provide guidance to the Scientific Council and the Secretariat to continue work in the next triennium. The information document provides a review of information regarding the current insect decline and the main factors causing the established loss of insect biomass. The review considered insect decline as a factor causing reduced availability of food during different stages of migratory species development, looked into the way in which land use change, climate change and pollution contribute to insect decline, and describes the important role of insects and the migratory insectivorous animals feeding on them in ecosystem functioning. The review identified gaps for further research, in particular the need to further examine the situation of migratory bats. Recommendations suggest measures which should be put in place to ensure the availability of insects as food for migratory insectivorous species, which mostly focus on habitat conservation, landscape management, and connectivity. This report represents a first step to understand the impact of insect decline on migratory species, on which future research can be built. It is therefore proposed that the Scientific Council examines the review in detail and the work continues to further address this threat through more specific tools which may include development of guidelines. Therefore, in terms of action, the COP is recommended to take note of the summary of the report as contained in Annex 1 of the document, adopt the draft decisions as contained in Annex 2 of the document, and delete Decision 13.129. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. If I could open the floor for any comments and interventions. Yes, Australia, please.
Thank you, Chair. Given the global concern about the dramatic declines of insect biodiversity, which directly and indirectly affect migratory species, the Australian Government was pleased to make a voluntary contribution to assist in the development of a draft report focusing on insect decline, and is happy to see the report provided to parties for their use, and we support its key messages and recommendations. We would also like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Jonas Rocklich under the supervision of Dr. David Ott and Christoph Scherber for preparing the report on behalf of the Secretariat, and we further support Scientific Council review of the findings of the report and implementing the follow-up actions as part of its program of work to gain a better understanding concerning the global trend of insect declines and subsequent impact on migratory species. We will continue to actively engage with Scientific Council on insect decline to support the research and the development of future guidelines and their implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia, and thank you for your involvement in the work to date. It's been much appreciated. United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my comments brief, but we also welcomed the report and found it an interesting read. There are some clear next steps that should be taken. We've got some very minor drafting suggestions to the decisions just to help target the further work. We can provide these to the Secretariat, but they're not particularly substantive, just clarificatory.
Thank you, UK. If you could send these comments in as soon as possible, then we'll produce a CRP based on that. Thank you very much. If there are no other comments on this paper at this point, then I would like to thank everyone involved in developing this initiative. I know it's something that has come from previous COPs as well, so thank you for your involvement in that. We will produce a CRP based on the comments received. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 30.4.4, which is light pollution. I believe our appointed councillor, Mark Simmons, is going to introduce this item. Yes, CNET, appointed councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Under this agenda item, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Doc 30.4.4, which was prepared by the Secretariat and which describes the process leading to the development of the revised light pollution guidelines. Annex 1 provides the proposed amendments to Resolution 13.5. Annex 2 contains draft decisions directed to the Secretariat and the Scientific Council. Annex 3 contains the CMS light pollution guidelines themselves, and there is also an addendum to the document containing comments by the Scientific Committee, and I would note here that they were limited to just a small change to the title of the documents. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the revised CMS light pollution guidelines provide a substantive document, and this provides an excellent introduction to the growing problem of light pollution. New here are guidelines for both migratory land birds and for bats, developed as part of the work agreed at the last COP. The opportunity was also taken intersessionally to improve and update some of the technical sections. These guidelines are an adaptation into an international context of national guidelines developed by the Government of Australia. Revisions were achieved through a rigorous process, including a series of online workshops and meetings with experts from around the world who very kindly gave their time to assist in this. And we would therefore like to thank all who took part, and in particular the following: Cesar San Miguel, Darrell Montgomery, Barbara Helm, Dieter Lang, Andrew Farnsworth, John Ballantyne, Rodrigo Medellin, Christian Voigt, Danilo Russo, Maurice Donners, Annika Jaggerbrand, Johannes Fischer, Graham Taylor, Kerry Borkin, Travis Longcorn, Joanna Coleman, Sergio Cabrera, Rob Clay and Stephen Garnett, Hayden Frisch Nawakama and Marco Barberi. Letitia Nunny, the project consultant, skillfully kept the whole complicated process on track and should be congratulated and thanked for this. This work, which also included a review of available information, which was considered by the 5th meeting of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council in 2021, and was supported by generous contributions from the German and Australian governments. During this project, we were also able to support several public outreach activities, and these are detailed in Doc 30.4.4, including World Migratory Bird Day in 2022, which, as you know, was themed Dim the Lights for Birds at Night. The revised document before us now includes updated sections on practical lighting design, what is light, measuring light, and artificial light auditing, and it also contains species-specific information for marine turtles, seabirds, shorebirds, and the 2 new annexes for migratory land birds and bats. The recommended actions are that the Conference of Parties is recommended to A, adopt the draft amendments to Resolution 13.5 as contained in Annex 1 to this document, B, adopt the draft decisions as contained in Annex 2 to this document, C, adopt the CMS light pollution guidelines as contained in Annex 3, and finally D, delete decisions 13.138 and 13.139 light pollution guidelines for wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Again, if I could open the floor for any comments. Got Australia, please.
Australia would like to thank the Secretariat for their work on coordinating and drafting international light pollution guidance for migratory species. Australia also thanks New Zealand for developing practical maritime guidance to help protect migratory species from the impacts of light pollution. Australia recognises the importance of addressing light pollution for migratory species and have long been a champion for developing useful materials for parties to access. Australia supports the development and adoption of CMS light pollution guidelines, noting that it remains important that they are consistent with Australian light pollution guidelines upon which CMS guidance is based. To maintain consistency with Australia's guidelines, Australia suggests badging the CMS guidelines as CMS International Light Pollution Guidelines for Migratory Species, to distinguish the scope as both international and pertaining to migratory species only. References to bats in the CMS guidelines should be referred to as migratory bats, where relevant, to distinguish the scope from the Australian Light Pollution Guidelines, which addresses non-migratory bats. Australia would also like to support the suggested text amendments arising from the 6th Sessional Committee meeting regarding the title of the resolution and decisions to ensure consistency with the text of the guidelines. Australia notes that decisions 13.138 and 13.139 have been fulfilled and thanks the Secretariat for their work to promote awareness of light pollution and its impacts on migratory birds. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Australia. I think the alignment from international to national guidelines is a key point in all guidelines that we may develop going forward. I see New Zealand and then Ocean Care. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand thanks the Secretariat and the COP-appointed Councillor for Marine Pollution for undertaking these very useful updates to the initial documents that were produced by Australia and adopted at COP14. The additional species groups added and revisions incorporating new information will strengthen parties' ability to manage a growing threat to migratory species, both on land and at sea. In New Zealand, we've already used these CMS documents to provide technical advice and input into resource planning decisions, and also provided a copy of the guidelines to our commercial fishers on ways to mitigate and prevent light attraction on vessels when at sea. We had anticipated these guidelines being made available as an information paper for this meeting, but as they were not, we request the Secretariat to make them readily available on the CMS website, please. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. And I see Ocean Care, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Ocean Care strongly supports the continuation of the work stream on light pollution through the adoption of the draft decisions. We look forward to either the appointment of a COP-appointed expert to help direct and lead the work in due course, or finding some alternative way to keep this work area fully alive. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ocean Care. European Union.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states welcome the work done by the Secretariat and the COP-appointed Council on Marine Pollution in disseminating and updating the CMS light pollution guidelines through a thorough consultation process with the Sessional Committee that has allowed the production of a more complete version of the mentioned guidelines. We agree with the proposed amendments to Resolution 13.5 and we support the adoption of the new CMS light pollution guidelines. Indeed, these guidelines are a very important step in addressing this increasing threat to migratory species. We do have a minor amendment that we will provide to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. If there are no further interventions on this, then we'll take the comments and produce a CRP and bring it back for your approval in due course. Thank you very much indeed for that, and thank you to all those involved, as we heard, in developing the guidelines. It's an excellent initiative. Can we move on then to 30.4.5, which is plastic pollution, and the Secretariat will introduce document 30.4.5. Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Chair. Distinguished delegates, under this agenda item, the Secretariat wishes to introduce document 30.4.5 on the impacts of plastic pollution on aquatic, terrestrial and avian species. This document was prepared by the Secretariat and the Scientific Council. This document has two annexes. Annex 1 contains an executive summary of the report Impacts of Plastic Pollution on Freshwater, Aquatic, Terrestrial and Avian Migratory Species in the Asia and Pacific region. The full version of this report can be found in Information Document 30.4.5. Annex 2 contains a set of draft decisions. The document also has an addendum which contains comments of the Scientific Council and its recommendation for adoption by COP with changes. In summary, the document reports on the implementation of decisions 13.123 to 13.125. With funding received from the Government of Japan and in collaboration with the UNEP Office for Asia and the Pacific, under the Countermeasure 2 project, the Secretariat commissioned the National Oceanography Centre of the UK to prepare the report Impacts of Plastic Pollution on Freshwater Aquatic, Terrestrial and Avian Migratory Species in the Asia and Pacific region. The report found that plastic pollution is a global issue, with plastic waste flowing into oceans from rivers. However, not all plastic pollution reaches the ocean and can impact species that live in and around river basins. Plastic pollution is a particular problem in the Asia-Pacific region. Two case studies in the report focus on the species of the Mekong and the Ganges. The document also addresses the issue of ghost gear under Resolution 12.20 on marine debris, reporting on the work of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative. The report calls for more effective waste management, recycling, and design of products, preventing plastic pollution at the source. It also cites the need for increased research efforts to understand the negative effects of plastic pollution on organisms and ecosystems, particularly on terrestrial species that have been poorly studied. As funding had only been available for a report on the Asia-Pacific region, further assessments are required in other regions. Against this backdrop, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to A. Take note of the executive summary and conclusions of the report, Impacts of Plastic Pollution on Freshwater, Aquatic, Terrestrial and Avian Migratory Species in the Asia and Pacific region, contained in Annex 1 of the document. B. Adopt the draft decisions contained in Annex 2 of the document. And C. Delete decisions 13.123 to 13.125. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Again, if I could open the floor for comment. Yes, Brazil, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Secretariat for the document. Brazil totally support the document. We have just a few minor suggestions on language. We would suggest that decision 14AA, letter A, the language should be changed to include the wording "to end," so it would read, "fully support the negotiations for a legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution." That's to align with the United Nations Environmental Assembly decision that convened the intergovernmental negotiations on this legal binding treaty, in which our country is completely engaged. And in decision 14BB, related to the mobilization, or the identification and mobilization of financial resources, we suggest to add in the end of the text the following expression: "In view of the different contributions to global environmental degradation and taking into account the specific challenges faced by developing countries." I'll send these suggestions by email to the Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil, for these important additions. If you could send that, that would be useful. European Union, please.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states recognize the importance of being aware of plastic pollution having serious negative impacts on the environment and human health, and that plastic pollution is a very important issue for migratory species and ecosystems, and that it can result in, among others, the poisoning and entanglement of species, as well as the degradation of habitats they depend on. We support the adoption of the draft resolution and decisions presented and the revisions proposed by the Scientific Council, including some minor amendments. We would highlight the importance of developing, in collaboration with other organizations, such as the FAO or NGOs, a harmonized standard and guidance relating to the circular design of fishing gear in order to prepare for its reuse, repair, or recycling, in line with the current EU work under the standardization bodies to develop such a standard. Having said that, we would like to acknowledge the comment made by the Scientific Committee that the resources to develop a report on the impact of plastic pollution are overstretched, and suggest to combine the efforts with draft decision 14 BBA from the document under agenda item 27.2.1. Finally, we recognize the collective effort made by the CMS family on this topic, and we recognize the key role of parties and other members of CMS for providing technical support and capacity building for this purpose. And we will provide our suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. If you could send them in as soon as possible, that would be helpful. Maldives, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have a minor amendment to Decision 14BB, where it currently states that parties, intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations are encouraged to identify and mobilize financial resources to support activities and initiatives towards combating and removing accumulated marine debris in areas of high importance for migratory species on the basis of the precautionary principle. We believe that combating and removing marine debris alone will address the issue in part, but we also need to support upstream activities to prevent plastic pollution. Therefore, we stress on the importance of mobilizing resources to support upstreaming activities towards prevention of plastic pollution. We would provide language towards supporting upstream activities to be added to Decision 14.BB, and we will submit this in writing. Waste management is a big challenge for a lot of countries in the Asia-Pacific, including the Maldives, especially plastic pollution. Therefore, we also propose to add a decision directed to the Secretariat, which would be subject to the availability of resources, undertake an analysis on priorities for increasing capacity of parties to address plastic and microplastic pollution at all stages of the life cycle to address risk to migratory species. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maldives. I'll take one more comment from the United Kingdom and then close after that. United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. We welcome the report included and support the intent of the document to address the impacts of plastic pollution. We have some proposals, again, to improve the clarity of the decisions, outlining the next steps for this work stream, highlight the range of size and types of plastic, and for the Secretariat to support and report on decisions 14AA to 14CC, rather than just decision 14DD, and by extension 14CC as originally drafted. I can run through those now or send them to the Secretariat.
I think if we send them to the Secretariat, this item will go to the working group as well, so that may be the better place if that's all right. Thank you. I'll take two further comments and then close from IUCN and Flora and Fauna. IUCN, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I intervened on a different agenda item, but it is very important that IUCN say this now. Regarding to the document UNEP/CMS COP14, document 32.3.5 on the proposal for concerted action for the Franciscana dolphin, already listed in the Appendix 1 and 2 of the Convention. IUCN would like to make some correction from our position paper. We would like to thank the three parties, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, for their proposal for concerted action for the Franciscana.
IUCN, sorry, we will come to that agenda item in due course. I'm not sure why we should take that now. It is on the agenda later.
We would like to just speak early about this so that we would like the parties to be aware of this issue.
What I'll do then, I'll carry on the conversation in relation to plastic pollution, and then I'll come to you in a moment for a very brief statement.
Thank you. Very brief, yes. Thank you very much.
All right. Let me go to Fauna and Flora first then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Fauna and Flora welcome the draft decision. We support suggestion on emphasizing the importance of mobilizing resources to prevent plastic pollution and research on the impact of plastic pollution in different sizes and materials. We also would like to highlight that local actors are equipped with location-specific knowledges and practices to conserve migratory species who they rely on and disproportionately impacted by plastic pollution. So Fauna and Flora encourage adding in decision 14.AA that parties are encouraged to ensure that local voices are driving both the development and implementation of ambitious, effective, and locally appropriate legally binding instrument. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fauna and Flora. I will go back briefly to IUCN. I really do not want to jump between agenda items, and I'll make an exception now because we've started, but I will not do this again. So IUCN, please be very brief.
Thank you so much for indulging us, Chair. So we would like to thank the three parties, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, for their proposal for a concerted action for the Franciscana dolphin, which responds to the action called for within the existing International Whaling Commission's Conservation Management Plan to include the Franciscana in bilateral and multilateral discussions, and specifically to generate discussions within the framework of the CMS. The proposal has been endorsed by the three parties, and we understand that this proposed concerted action does not duplicate effort or compete in any way with the International Whaling Commission's Conservation Management Plan. Rather, it is meant to complement the Conservation Management Plan and to reinforce and guide, thereby strengthen the overall effort to protect the Franciscana dolphin, a vulnerable regional endemic species. Therefore, IUCN supports this concerted action proposal and recommend its adoption by the COP14. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, IUCN. For that, we will come to that in due course on the agenda. Let me just summarize then on plastic pollution. We will refer this to the working group for further discussion. I think some of the comments we heard may be substantive, positively substantive, so I'd ask the working group to produce a CRP and bring it back. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 30.5, which is conservation implications of animal culture and social complexity. And I think the Secretariat will introduce. Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished delegates. On behalf of the chair of the expert working group on animal culture, Philippa Breaks, who unfortunately cannot be here, I would like to introduce document 30.5 Rev 1 on conservation implications of animal culture and social complexity. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council and its expert working group on conservation implications of animal culture and social complexity and the Secretariat. The document contains two annexes. Annex 1 are the recommendations arising from the second CMS workshop on animal culture and social complexity, which took place in April 2023. Annex 2 contains draft decisions proposed for adoption. In summary, the document reports on the outcomes of the intersessional work of the expert working group, which is focusing on the role of culture as an essential component of enhancing conventional conservation approaches and decision-making. This way, the adaptive potential and long-term persistence of viable populations can be more effectively ensured. The intersessional work was divided into 9 taxonomic subgroups and 3 subgroups on cross-cutting issues, namely translocations, rapid assessment, and human-wildlife interactions. In addition, 2 subgroups consider the 2 culture-related concerted actions on our agenda on Friday, the one dealing with eastern tropical Pacific sperm whales and the one on nut-cracking chimpanzees. We would like to thank the members and the chair of the expert working group for their incredible dedication to this work stream. In terms of the actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to note the reports of the workshops in 2022 and 2023 and the resulting recommendations contained in Annex 1 of the document, adopt the draft decisions as contained in Annex 2 of the document, and delete decisions 13.102 to 13.105. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. This is indeed a fascinating work area for the Convention and one that's gaining due prominence now. Excuse me. Could I open the floor for comment, please? Got United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. The UK welcomes the work being undertaken on animal culture and social complexity by CMS, and in particular, the focus on how practical application of such information can help achieve positive conservation outcomes. As more work has been undertaken, it's becoming clearer that animal culture and social complexity have wide applicability across a variety of taxa. We look forward to reviewing further outputs from the working group. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I go to IUCN, please?
Thank you, Chair. The CMS Secretariat and the IUCN Species Survival Commission co-convened a side event on Tuesday, 12 February, and the following statement on human and animal culture as determinants of dynamic spatial units for species conservation action was agreed by all the participants. We submitted for the record, and it's brief, so I'll just read it quickly. A growing body of evidence demonstrates that culture is important for both human and non-human populations. Social learning, the processes which can generate discrete cultures within and between animal social groups, can result in behavioral variation across populations. Some socially learned behaviors can be persistent and relatively stable, whilst others may be more ephemeral. As a result, social learning can generate resilience or vulnerability and can increase the efficiency of reintroductions or translocations, or improve human-wildlife conflicts and interactions. Animal culture is an important tenet of biodiversity and is highly relevant to many aspects of conservation science, policy, and practice. The groundbreaking work conducted over the last decade in this area by CMS has identified several key aspects, including the need to conserve cultural capacity across populations to generate resilience and the potential for adaptation to a wide range of threats. The IUCN Red List of Threatened Species integrates green status metrics that quantify the impact of conservation action on population recovery, forecasts the effects of conservation interventions, and measures progress towards achieving full conservation status. Evaluation of green status requires delineation of special units by subpopulation, following ecological and geographical features and location, or a combination of these. Both human and animal culture can act as drivers of population structure and therefore determinants of spatial units relevant to green status and conservation action under CMS. In addition, indigenous peoples and local communities divide animal populations following criteria such as use and spirituality. Given the broad diversity of vertebrate taxa for which there is emerging evidence of social learning and multifaceted interface between social learning, animal culture, and conservation, the participants agreed the need to formalize the collaboration between CMS and IUCN on this important cross-cutting issue, specifically to explore implications for population structure and defining coherent geographical units, utility for reintroductions, translocations, and human-wildlife interactions, suitability for integration into green status assessments, application under special attributes in red list assessments, and opportunities to incorporate indigenous perspectives and local knowledge on animal cultures to advance understanding and conservation objectives. Cultural transmission can generate complexity within and between animal populations, which generates several fundamental questions for conservation scientists and managers. We include our email addresses for anybody pleased to contact us if have submitted the document to the Secretariat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, IUCN. Go to the European Union, please.
Thank you, Chair. The European Union and its member states take note of the work done by the expert group on animal culture and social complexity and the Secretariat to address tasks mentioned in Decision 13.103 and the recommendations laid down in the Annex 1 of the document 30.5 Revision 1. We welcome the draft decisions also laid down in the Annex 2 of this document, but we will ask the Secretariat to clarify the purpose of the paragraph 14 CCA. And we will also have a proposed amendment in the paragraph 14 CCB to better reflect the recommendation of the Permanent Forum to disconnect the term local communities from the term indigenous peoples. The EU and its member states encourage stakeholders, including the Secretariat, to organize appropriate activities to facilitate parties to address the recommendations and draft decisions laid down in this document, as well as to cover identified knowledge gaps. And we will provide our suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. If I could go to Argentina next, please. Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. The delegation of Argentina would like to congratulate the working group on their work, and we'd like to indicate that we share their conclusions and we agree with their proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I'll go to Ocean Care, then Born Free Foundation, and I will close after Senegal. Thank you. So could I go to Senegal first? Thank you. Senegal.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. We welcome this draft decision. As you are aware, animal culture plays an important role in ensuring the survival of many species. Chimpanzees, for example, are species that live in marginal areas, and they depend on the cultures that allow them to survive in hostile environments, different from their original habitats. So it's a behavior that's very important for species. It also applies to cetaceans, elephant species. And it's important that we continue with this information so that we can produce real solutions and recommendations to ensure the survival of these species. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. If I could go to Monaco next. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you, Chair. My apologies for just requesting the floor now. I'd like to most sincerely thank the working group for all their efforts, and I'd also like to highlight the enormous amount of work that's done in CMS on the subject, and recall that this subject and the consequences of culture for conservation were included in the COP11 at Quito, and we were very interested in the subject and financed the first work to see that this started on the conservation of cetaceans, and to see how far it has extended to other taxa is very impressive. and very important. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could go to Ocean Care, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ocean Care supports the continuation of the work stream on the conservation implications of animal culture and social complexity. We encourage parties to accept the draft decisions and to support the work of the expert working group on animal culture and social complexity. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Born Free Foundation, please.
Thank you, Chair. Born Free welcomes this report and applauds the CMS for developing this work stream, unique amongst MEAs. You're right, Chair, that this is a fascinating topic of great interest to the public, but it is important that it's not just of academic interest. Born Free would like to stress the practical implications of the work and recommend that parties should consult with the expert working group on an ongoing basis when developing and implementing concerted actions and other conservation interventions for socially complex CMS-listed migratory species. And that's especially important for those species that have a long lifespan, because you see cultural transmission not just between mother and offspring, or parents and offspring, but between grandparents and their offspring. And that has such echoes to human society. So the integration of appropriate measures into related conservation and management activities, parties should consider animal culture and social learning when designing measures to mitigate human-wildlife conflict involving CMS-listed species, as well as following the international consensus principles for ethical wildlife control. The expert group should also consider developing a motion for submission to the 2025 IUCN World Conservation Congress, promoting recognition of the importance of considering animal culture and social complexity in the design and implementation of conservation activities involving socially complex species, and seek support from other IUCN member organizations. So we recommend that the COP adopts the draft decisions and deletes the earlier decisions on this topic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Born Free Foundation. I think given the range of comments, the range of changes to the text, and some of them, again, positively substantive changes that may be here, I think we should refer it to the working group to produce a CRP and bring it back to us for our approval. Can I just check, does Secretariat want to add any comment?
Thank you, Chair. I took note of only one actual text change from the EU, which we have, which does not affect the content. So perhaps we seek clarification if there's need for further text changes, but this one I think can be easily dealt with like that. I understand there was a question from the EU on decision 14 CCA. The way I understood it, the first sub-point, you wanted an explanation on phylogenetic inference, or was there another? Okay. So I can try to explain. I consulted with the chair of the working group on this. So the idea here is to develop better tools for understanding how plausible it would be to infer that evolutionary related species that occupy a similar niche, perhaps have similar social structure, may also have social learning. And that's because obtaining data on social learning can be time-consuming and very challenging for some species, especially if they are already very endangered, for example, or very secretive. So the expert working group is proposing to develop a set of guidelines around this type of inference that would bring some rigor to that idea. For example, if one species of bird learns their songs culturally, can we infer that this is true for a related species as well, and make use of that in the conservation efforts related? I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Secretariat are advising that we could try to go to a CRP on this rather than back into the working group. So let's take this as a CRP, bring it back to the committee for approval and any further discussion. Thank you, Secretariat. Thank you very much for these comments. Can we move on then to item 30.6, which is tourism, and a representative of the Government of the United Kingdom will introduce this item. So, United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, under Agenda Item 30.6, the United Kingdom wishes to introduce document 30.6, Rev 1, Ecotourism and Migratory Species. This document was prepared by the United Kingdom. This document contains two annexes. Annex 1 contains draft amendments to Resolution 12.23. Annex 2 contains guidelines for parties and stakeholders in relation to ecotourism and migratory species, which were proposed as a new annex to Resolution 12.23. There is also a related information document, IMP 30.6, which contains a wider review of migratory species ecotourism. The document also has an addendum where Scientific Council's comments and recommendations to the COP are provided. In summary, document 30.6 reports on the implementation of Decision 13.136, which states that the Scientific Council shall conduct periodic appraisals of the latest scientific evidence on the impacts of ecotourism activities on migratory species and recommend refined guidelines. The Joint Nature Conservation Committee of the United Kingdom undertook a review of ecotourism. The review evaluates definitions of ecotourism, as well as positive and negative environmental and socio-economic impacts of ecotourism on wildlife and people. It includes a set of case studies which cover a range of species and levels of interaction with wildlife. The review concludes with a set of recommendations which are appended to Annex 2 of Resolution 12.23 as guidelines. The guidelines cover a range of specific topics, including governance, spatial planning, tourism trajectories and market segments, monitoring, training and certification, and messaging. Minor amendments are proposed to Resolution 12.23, including updates to preambular paragraphs to capture new frameworks, action plans and CMS resolutions relevant to ecotourism, and amendments to operational paragraphs to endorse the guidance provided in Annex 2 and share experiences applying ecotourism guidelines. Therefore, in terms of actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to take note of Information Document 30.6, adopt the draft amendments to Resolution 12.23, endorse as part of the amendments to Resolution 12.23 the guidelines contained in Annex 2, and delete decisions 13.135 to 13.136. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom, and thank you for all your work on this issue. I know it's been a considerable body of work that's got us to where we are today, so thank you for that. I'll open the floor. I've got European Union and then India. European Union?
Yes, thank you. The EU and its member states thank the UK for their work in preparing document 30.6 Rev 1, as well as the Secretariat for its ongoing work on bringing together ecotourism and migratory species in a peaceful and respectful manner. We remain committed to fostering ecotourism and better aligning it with our collective commitments and targets for biodiversity conservation, restoration and sustainable use. In particular, we support strong, bold actions that take into account migratory species, their routes and other needs when designing, implementing and revising national tourism plans and other initiatives. In broad terms, we support the proposed annex to Resolution 12.23 as it provides up-to-date guidelines and measures for parties and other stakeholders, including IPLCs, to make ecotourism more nature-oriented and to comprehensively account for migratory species. Similarly, the EU and its member states would like to propose some minor adjustments to the text in three aspects. First of all, strengthening the language of the annex to reflect the urgency of the actions needed. Second, to better reflect the plurality of actors that are involved in the design, implementation and revision of national tourism action plans, strategies, guidelines and protocols. And thirdly, to connect this economic activity and its considerations regarding migratory species with other challenges that affect biodiversity loss, and we will provide our suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you. EU. India, please.
Thank you, Chair. We appreciate the review of ecotourism undertaken by the Joint Nature Conservation Committee of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We note that ecotourism, if undertaken in sustainable manner, has potential for generating awareness amongst the people on conservation of wildlife and their habitats. We wish to underscore the role of local communities in undertaking a sustainable ecotourism in wildlife areas, as low-impact ecotourism can provide economic benefits to the local communities. However, unplanned tourism can have adverse impacts on the wildlife, thereby jeopardizing the economic benefits to the communities and at times leading to human-wildlife conflict situations. India has issued national guidelines for sustainable ecotourism in 2021, which aims at undertaking low-impact ecotourism in wildlife areas with the active involvement of local communities. It also provides for periodic monitoring of implementation of the guidelines. India welcomes the amendments suggested in the draft resolution annexed to the document UNEP CMS COP14 Doc 30.6 Rev 1 Annex 1. We also wish to add the words involve the local communities in preparation of tourism plans after paragraph 3G of the operational part of the draft guidelines. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. India, if you could send these small amendments in to the Secretariat, that would be helpful. Could I go then to the Born Free Foundation?
Thank you, Chair. Born Free welcomes this report, and once again CMS is taking a lead on a really important topic. As we all know, tourism isn't always ecotourism, and tourism, whilst bringing important financial support to conservation activities, can, if mishandled, actually damage the very species that the tourist wishes to come and see. So guidelines are really important. And I know that the IUCN specialist groups have developed guidelines for great ape tourism and many other taxa, but these don't have the force of law. So by CMS adopting these resolutions, it brings impetus to those thoroughly researched and worked out guidelines from IUCN. So Born Free has a minor amendment to the 14th preambular paragraph, which I'll just send to the Secretariat. But I applaud you again in taking on this subject and bringing it into the Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Born Free, for that. I see Australia, and then I will close after Australia. So Australia, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note that the Scientific Council had also provided comments on this document, as the UK noted in their introduction, and Australia would support inclusion of these suggested amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. We will produce a CRP on the issue and bring it back to the committee for your approval in due course. But thank you very much indeed for your comments. Thank you again to United Kingdom for the work done. That brings us on to what we had scheduled to begin to address in today, if you follow my logic. So I will move on straight on to essentially item 6, which is interpretation and implementation of the Convention. And then within that, to begin on item 24, which is the review mechanism and national legislation programme. And the Secretariat will introduce document 24. Oh, sorry, Brazil. I'm sorry. Take that comment first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize for coming late on this subject. Brazil would like to note the lack of the treatment of recreation in the tourism paragraph. Recreation and ecotourism are not the same thing, and recreation is growing throughout protected areas, connectivity corridors, and wildlife movement areas. It is noteworthy that the United States has elevated 3 national long-distance trails to the status of protected areas. Brazil now has a strong policy of establishing reforested trails linking protected areas, and these narrow corridors are being used by wildlife to move to and fro protected areas. There is not yet enough hard scientific data to evaluate properly the value of these corridors, but empirical facts lead us to note that recreation and ecotourism can be strong tools of territorial gains for assuring the connectivity against the use of private land. Therefore, we would like the Convention to look in future on the role of recreation and ecotourism as strong tools of establishing connectivity areas between protected areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brazil, for that very interesting example, and something I'm sure you will follow up with our appointed councillors on connectivity as well as a key issue. So thank you for that. Let me then move on, if I can, to item 24, which is the review mechanism and national legislation programme. It's document 24, and the Secretariat will introduce. So, Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, under agenda item 24, the Secretariat wishes to introduce document 24, review mechanism and national legislation programme. This document contains 2 annexes for consideration of the meeting. Annex 1 contains draft operational guidelines for the review mechanism. Annex 2 contains a set of draft decisions. Regarding the review mechanism, during the triennium, the Secretariat admitted a communication on a possible implementation matter designated as file number 2021/01, which pertains to the development of a project within the Vrosha-Narta protected landscape involving Albania as the concerned party that would potentially affect Appendix 1 species, in particular the Dalmatian pelican. The Secretariat informed the Standing Committee during its 53rd meeting about the progress, including a joint mission conducted with the Secretariats of the Berne Convention and AEWA, with the objective of gathering additional information in order to be able to make an informed assessment on the matter. Since then, in September 2023, a joint mission report was shared with the government of Albania, along with a request for the government to outline its plans for addressing the remaining concerns to ensure compliance with Article 3.4 of the Convention. In December 2023, the matter was brought to the attention of the Standing Committee, which will assess whether the case is ill-funded or not and determine next steps after this meeting. In accordance with Resolution 12.9, the Secretariat identified areas for enhancing the implementation of the review mechanism and proposed to the Standing Committee the development of operational guidelines to provide clarity on different stages of the process. Annex 1 contains a draft of the guidelines after consultation with the Standing Committee on its outline. The proposed guidelines would provide transparency and clarity to the review mechanism because they specified information that the Secretariat can make public and at which stages of the review process, including through guidance on the establishment of an online registry of review files, guidelines on information gathering missions, and collaboration with other MEAs. Regarding the national legislation program, the review of legislation of 58 parties participating in the program, prepared by the Secretariat with the funding of the EU, has revealed some inconsistencies in how the Convention is interpreted, leading to legislative guides and regulatory challenges at the national level. The analysis has highlighted varying levels of implementation and different interpretations of critical concepts, such as the definition of take and its exceptions. The analysis of questionnaires has also shed light on penalties for violation of the taking prohibition, with some evidence that these penalties may not provide sufficient deterrent to prevent illegal taking. Additionally, there is a lack of information available to the Secretariat regarding the enforcement of national legislation and the presence of effective mechanisms for full convention implementation. The analysis also covered weaknesses and gaps in national legislation concerning the exceptions to the taking prohibition. In addition, parties are not consistently notifying to the Secretariat of their exceptions as required by Article 3.7 of the Convention. To address these issues, the Secretariat will continue the legislative review process and assist parties in implementing Article 3.5 and will identify priorities for capacity building and non-technical support related to the CMS definition of taking and the exceptions to the taking prohibition. The document proposes in Annex 2 the preparation of a study on penalties, including both criminal penalties and administrative sanctions, to determine whether national legislation can allow for effective deterrent and proportionate penalties for Appendix 1, a species taken in violation of the Convention, and the organization, in cooperation with UNEP, of a dedicated workshop for CMS parties to support them in strengthening national legal frameworks for the implementation of CMS. Therefore, in terms of actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to adopt the operational guidelines for the review mechanism and adopt the draft decisions contained in Annex 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Again, could I open the floor for any comments? European Union, please.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states welcome the progress report to implement the review mechanism and national legislation program. We would like to reiterate the importance of the national legislation program in the correct and full implementation of CMS and call for parties in a capacity to do so to provide legal and technical support as well as financial resources to facilitate the implementation of the program. We appreciate the development of operational guidelines to provide clarity and guide the Secretariat and the Standing Committee in managing the review mechanism files, and we support its adoption with two changes. First, regarding the operational guidelines, under the first heading, we would like to strike the first sentence as well as the word information from the second sentence. So we would like to strike the sentence which reads, parties may submit a written request instructing the Secretariat to keep certain findings and reports confidential. And then as a language correction, we would then like to strike likewise, comma, concerned. And then in the next sentence, we would strike information so that that sentence would read, and that's the beginning of the paragraph then, parties may waive confidentiality over communications exchanged with the Secretariat regarding specific implementation matters and so on. The reason is that this broad possibility, which was enshrined in the first sentence, to ask for confidentiality regarding findings and reports, is in our view not in line with the principle enshrined in Resolution 12.9 in Section 1A, paragraph 3, which states explicitly that findings and reports are treated in an open and transparent manner. The only exception to that rule is that communications between the Secretariat and individual parties on specific implementation matters are generally confidential. So an exception to the general rule is only for such communications, but not for findings, reports, nor for information generally. We uphold that transparency is essential for this mechanism, and we do not wish to renegotiate the resolution 12.9, which represents a carefully drafted compromise that we reached at COP12. I would now come to the draft decisions where, in relation to those draft decisions which are in Annex 2, we can generally also accept the proposals, but would like to propose one small edit. So in decision 14BB(a), we would like to change the word invite to read urge, so that the decision 14BB(a) would read, parties that have submitted the national legislation questionnaire and received a national legislation profile from the Secretariat are urged to take appropriate measures to implement Article 3, Paragraph 5. So the change is just to replace invite with urge. And the reason is that this decision addresses the implementation of Article 3, Paragraph 5 of the Convention, and we would certainly like to urge parties rather than to simply invite parties to implement this legally binding and very central provision of the Convention. We will provide, or have already provided, depending on the internet, our suggestions to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. We'll wait to receive the comments if we haven't already received them. So thank you for that. If we could go to Ocean Care, to India first then, please.
Thank you, Chair. India would like to take this further to the working group and have further discussions on this, especially on the review mechanisms and on the resolution 12.9. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India, for that. I'll summarize at the end of the item. Let's go to Ocean Care and then Wildlife Conservation Society. So Ocean Care, please.
Thank you, Chair. The review mechanism and national legislation program is one of the essential and fundamental pillars for the Convention to further improve implementation of conservation action. This week's published report about the status of migratory species and its alarming findings is further testimony that we jointly and collaboratively have to do more to protect and conserve migratory species and the habitats in prey. We welcome the proposal, operational guidelines to further improve this relatively young tool and appreciate the adjustments suggested by the European Union. We hope to see parties endorsing the draft resolution and decision and the guidelines with improvements proposed. Implementation and enforcement are key to whether the objectives of the Convention can and will be achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ocean Care, for that. Let me go then to Madagascar, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time Madagascar is taking the floor, and in doing so, we wish to also congratulate and thank the government of Uzbekistan, as well as the Secretariat of the Convention, for organizing this conference. Madagascar supports this document, and my comments will focus on an addition to Annex 2. In 14AA, the addition would focus on the principle of encouraging collaboration with other similar initiatives which already exist. The aim would be to ensure effective synergies among all stakeholders at all levels, but also country support to help them strengthen their national legislation. Madagascar is a beneficiary of this initiative already, and I believe other countries are also beneficiaries here. The wording of the proposal would be under 14AA and would read, the Secretariat is requested, so it would be an addition to this paragraph. The Secretariat is requested to strengthen national legislation in line with the CITES national legislation program and the SWM program led by the FAO, with partnership consortia, including the International Forestry Research Centre, CIFOR, the Centre for Agronomic Development Research, and the Centre for the Conservation of Wildlife. These consortia have already been mentioned under item 13, I believe. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madagascar. If we could go then to Wildlife Conservation Society, and I'll close and summarise after their intervention. Wildlife Conservation Society, please.
Thank you, Chair. Much of what we wanted to say has been said. We strongly support the intervention by the European Union and its member states and the helpful suggestions and text edits provided in their intervention. We also support the intervention by the government of Madagascar, in particular the reference both to the CITES national legislation project and the Sustainable Wildlife Management Program of FAO, which is a consortium of CIFOR, CIRAD, and the Wildlife Conservation Society. We think it's very important that the Secretariat in this critical effort also collaborate with other initiatives that are working with parties to update and improve their legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wildlife Conservation Society. I'll take one final intervention then on this from FAO. FAO, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since this is the first time that FAO takes the floor at this COP, please let me extend our gratitude to the hosting government of Uzbekistan for its warm hospitality. This is to also support the proposal of Madagascar, and this is to know that the aim of the SWM program is to improve wildlife conservation and food security. We're making good progresses and creating approaches that can be replicated elsewhere, including by supporting governments on their efforts to strengthening national policy and legal frameworks. This Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States initiative is funded by European Union with co-funding from the French Facility for Global Environment and the French Development Agency. Thank you.
Thank you, FAO. We have a number of relatively straightforward amendments to the text on this, so we will produce a CRP. Could I ask India, though, if there are substantive issues that we need to take back to the working group? You were requesting that we do that, which we're very happy to do, but if you could perhaps indicate the substantive nature of the issues that you would like discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to actually go in deep dive into Resolution 12.9 and then assess the document as a whole. And we will give also parallelly the comments by email and also in the working group. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. That's very clear. We'll take it to the working group then to discuss further and to produce a CRP to come back to committee. Thank you very much. Let me then move as...
Stop for a second.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. We will take that to the working group for their deliberation and then come back as a revised paper. Thank you very much. Let me move on then to item 25, which is the review of decisions. and document 25, and the Secretariat will introduce. Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, under Agenda Item 25, the Secretariat wishes to introduce Document 25, Review of Decisions. Resolution 11.6, Rev COP14, Review of Decisions, instructs the Secretariat to revise the Register of Decisions in force after each meeting of the Conference to the parties and to provide justification for any proposed changes to the decision at each meeting of the Conference of the parties. While most of the decisions in effect after COP13 are reported on in meeting documents and feature in the agenda of COP14, when revising the register of decisions in effect, the Secretariat identified those decisions that are not addressed in any other COP meeting document and provides in Annex 1 a list of this document in a summary on the implementation status or actions undertaken in regard to these decisions since COP13, and a recommendation from the Secretariat concerning the renewal, amendment, or deletion. In particular, it's recommended to delete Decision 13.6, delete Decision 13.16, delete Decisions 13.71 and 13.72, delete Paragraph A of Decision 13.73. Renew Paragraph B of Decision 13.73. Delete Decisions 13.74 and 13.75, and delete Decision 13.137. The Conference of the Parties is recommended to decide on the appropriate action to be taken in relation to the decisions contained in Annex of this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. If I could open the floor for any interventions. Yes, European Union, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the EU and its member states thank the Secretariat for the proposals for the retirement of the COP13 decisions and resolutions. We can support the proposals made in the Annex 1 except for two, which are Decision 13.16 and Decision 13.71, where we would appreciate some further clarification. For Decision 13.16, the Secretariat indicated that an information document was produced to inform CITES management authorities of species listed in CMS Appendix 1 that may be subject to trade under CITES. There is, however, no indication in the document how the CITES Secretariat was involved in the development of this document. As the involvement of the CITES Secretariat was a request by the parties to the CMS Secretariat and important to facilitate cooperation among the MEAs at national level, we would like to know how the CMS Secretariat involved the CITES Secretariat in the development of this document. And for the other decision, Decision 13.71, we agree with the deletion of Paragraph B, although we have a question regarding Part A, where parties were requested to provide information regarding legal acts necessary to address the prohibition of the taking of Appendix 1 listed chondrichthyran species. The deletion proposed is based on the lack of information received from the parties. However, as the need for information still remains, we are not convinced that this is solved by deleting the COP request to parties. We would therefore appreciate also some clarification on how the Secretariat intends to address this, or whether it wouldn't be better to have this request to parties to be repeated by COP14. Thank you so much.
Thank you, European Union. Secretariat, do you want to respond to these queries now? Secretariat?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, EU, for the questions. With regard to Decision 1316, regarding the list of species on the CITES and CMS appendices, This work was started at the beginning of the triennium, but because of staffing changes in the Secretariat, it later fell through the cracks. And so, just as we were preparing our COP documents, we realized that this had not been done, and a small team in the Secretariat cobbled together this information document, which we do agree is not fully meeting the original decision. And there was no time at that point in which to consult with the CITES Secretariat. We do believe that the species list is entirely accurate because we work very closely with CITES and we are very familiar with the new species that have been added to each of the appendices in the last 3 years. However, I'm very happy if we renew the decision, and CITES Secretariat have already indicated to me that they'd be very happy to work with us on that. And then, regarding 1371, which relates to existing legislation on sharks and rays, indeed, I can see the value in keeping Part A of 1371, where parties are requested to review their existing legislation and enact new legislation with a view to addressing the prohibition and taking of Appendix 1 listed chondrichtran species. We would be very happy to keep that part of the decision.
Thank you, Secretariat. EU, I wonder if you'd like to respond to the comments. It seemed very straightforward, but EU?
Yes, thank you. And just to thank the Secretariat for looking into this and making sure we don't lose these two activities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, EU. I do wonder if we could agree this document with the change that we retain paragraph A under 13.71, which allows further enforcement of that message. With that change, I see no more comments. Could I ask that you are able at this point to recommend adoption of this paper? Thank you. Sorry, Secretariat are reminding me also the retention of paragraph 1316 as outlined by the EU. So retain paragraph 1316 and then retain paragraph A under 13.71. With these changes, are we able to recommend adoption of this document? So that's document 25. Is recommended for adoption. Thank you. That's we've still got quite a few to do. Thank you, and thank you, EU, for that clarity. Let's move on then to item 26, which is definition of the terms range state and vagrant. I believe this will be introduced by a representative of the Scientific Council, Stephen Garnett. Stephen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, under the agenda item 26.1, Scientific Council wishes to introduce document 26, implementation of decision 13.140. Guidance on the use of the term vagrant. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council. This document contains one annex. The annex contains guidance on the use of the term vagrant. In summary, decision 13.140 of the Conference of the Parties requested the Scientific Council to develop interpretations for when the terms range state and vagrant apply and report to the Conference of the Parties at its 14th meeting on the progress in implementing this decision. The Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council established an intersessional working group to identify how parties determine if they are a range state or not for a particular species, and the potential to provide the guidance on the use of the term vagrant for use by the Convention. The document highlights the factors identified by the working group, which considered together might support assessment of a species as a vagrant, highlighting the need for there to be sufficient knowledge of a species' distribution and migration patterns. However, the sixth meeting of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council could not agree to recommend the guidance provided by the Intersessional Working Group, which is provided in the annex, for adoption by the COP, as recommending the guidelines for adoption was beyond the mandate of the working group. The committee nevertheless agreed to present the report, including draft guidance produced in the working group, to the Conference of the Parties in keeping with its mandate in Decision 13.140. Therefore, in terms of the actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to take note of the report, consider if any further work is necessary, particularly regarding the potential policy and/or legal implications of this matter. Further discussion is taking place in the Cost-Cutting Issues Working Group. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. And again, if I could open the floor for any interventions. Yes, European Union, please.
Yes, thank you. And the EU and its member states thank the Scientific Council and its working group for the report, which demonstrates the complexity of this issue and the difficulties in providing clear and simple guidance. In particular, we take note of the challenges posed by the lack of data on migratory behavior, on the need for implementing the precautionary principle when managing species protected by CMS, as well as the fact that binary decisions on vagrancy are difficult to make and would need continuous reassessment in times of increasing climate-induced range shifts of species where a vagrant may actually be a sign for a shifting migration route. As regards to recommended decisions, we support the recommendation from the Scientific Council to take note of the report. Furthermore, the EU and its member states do not consider that any further work is necessary regarding the potential policy and/or legal implications of the assignment of a species as vagrant. We believe that the report is exhaustive in dealing with this issue. We would therefore suggest that the COP decides that no further work is necessary on this item, and we have a new draft decision proposal to that effect, which we provided to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. Zimbabwe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Zimbabwe notes document 26 Rev 1 and wishes to thank the Intersessional Working Group of the Sessional Committee for its excellent work on the subject matter. While we appreciate that there may be need for further work on potential policy and legal implications, which may result from the implementation of draft guidance for CMS parties on the use of the term vagrant, we urge parties to consider adopting the draft guidance produced by the working group. We are confident that the definition provided by the working group is a good starting point that can build upon and allows focused allocation of resources to migratory species. Further work may be needed to ensure that the conservation status of vagrants is not compromised and would continue to receive as much attention as our migratory species. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. If I could move on to the United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. As we will all be aware, by virtue of Article 6 of the Convention, parties should be reviewing as part of the national reporting process whether or not they are range states for migratory species listed in Appendix 1 and 2. So that process should be being done at least once every 3 years by parties. In order to assist at that process, at the 13th meeting of the Conference of Parties, Decision 13.140, addressed to the Scientific Council, was adopted. This means that the parties requested the Scientific Council to A. Develop as practical guidance for CMS parties interpretations for when terms range state and vagrant apply. and B, report to the Conference of Parties at its 14th meeting on the progress in implementing this decision. As we will frequently be highlighting elsewhere, the impacts of climate change are having implications for the previous natural ranges of species. The working group created by the Scientific Council considering this matter agreed that a concrete definition with numerical thresholds was not possible, as this is a dynamic issue. The guidance advocates a precautionary principle, provides parties with flexibility, and is to aid parties' decision-making and review of the migratory species for which they are range states, or may have become range states for, and therefore have certain obligations for. The guidance was discussed at the Sessional Committee 6 of the Scientific Council, where there were a range of views expressed. We would welcome hearing the views of parties who were not present, as it is disappointing that this Conference of Parties is not seeking to adopt this guidance in accordance with the previous COP decision. Finally, we would like to thank the Scientific Council for its hard work in producing this guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Could I go to Argentina, please?
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. We would like to thank this intersessional group for their extremely important work, and we'd like to join the comments that we have heard from the Scientific Council. We'd like to thank them once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. South Africa, please.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports the statement by Zimbabwe and thank the Scientific Council for preparing this important document. South Africa noted that the Scientific Council couldn't agree on recommending the guidance for adoption by this COP, as it was beyond their mandate. It is requested that consultation with various CMS agreements within the CMS family be conducted if the working group is instructed to continue refining guidance for submission to the next COP, to ensure that this consistent approach is taken and in particular attention is paid to parties responsible to prepare proactively for climate change, for climate-induced range shift. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Israel, please.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to echo the comments from the European Union. We were present at the debate in the Scientific Council, which spent a lot of time going over this issue. And as requested by the last COP, the Scientific Council did bring it up and set up a working group and spent a lot of time studying this. And the final conclusion of the Scientific Council was that we should note this document and that no further action is required. And we support the recommendation of the Scientific Council that this should be noted and no further action by the COP on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand would like to thank the Intersessional Working Group for the detailed and considered work they put into preparing a paper requested by the last COP. We thank UK for drawing our attention to the relevant obligations in the Convention and are slightly perplexed that the Sessional Committee could not agree on this work. In New Zealand, we are at the edge of the migration routes for many bird species and have to decide if the species is a regular visitor or a vagrant. To us, the guidance offered in the document is helpful in making this assessment. Obviously, any guidance is voluntary and can be used by parties as they see fit to support a robust decision. New Zealand supports adoption of the guidance contained in the annex. However, if this is not possible at this COP, at a minimum, we request the Secretariat to make the guidance available on the website for parties to use as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Senegal, please, and then Australia, and I will close after Australia. So, Senegal.
Thank you very much, Chair. Senegal takes note of document 26 and understands the complexity of this matter, in particular in the light of climate change. We must take into account climate aspects that can interfere in the migration cycles of species. And speaking about vagrant or range state species is a very complex matter. So I congratulate the working group for all they have done on the subject. The recommendations are very relevant, and we support the European Union with their recommendations and what we have heard, and we support that it does not need to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. Australia.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Australia welcomes the development of the guidance material, particularly on determining vagrancy. We would like to thank the Scientific Council for the significant intersessional work it has done on this report and document. The guidance seeks to support parties in assessing whether a species should be considered vagrant in their country, as this has implications with regard to our responsibilities under CMS as a range state. We note that the general purpose of guidance documents is for parties to use them if they wish. They are voluntary and are designed to support parties to assess issues in a consistent manner. The guidelines have sought to build in the dynamic environment within which we are living and are not designed to constrain parties in their assessments of species occurring within their jurisdiction. Consistent application and interpretation amongst parties is an important factor in many areas of the Convention, and this guidance seeks to support this specifically in relation to vagrancy. We would support adoption by the COP of the guidance material. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. If I could go then to the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As indicated in our previous statement, we can agree to follow the Scientific Council to note the report, but we do not support any kind of adoption or other endorsement of the guidance by the COP for various reasons. In particular, we are concerned that we would be introducing a new term, which is not part of the Convention text, but at the same time goes to the core of the Convention by redefining the definition of range state in the Convention text. It thus opens the door for an exception from the obligations in the Convention, which is not in the text. This is particularly problematic when the new concept, and therefore the exception, remains ambiguous and adds uncertainty. As we can see from the draft guidance, it remains very difficult to generally define vagrancy, and even more so with changing migration patterns in times of climate change. We therefore cannot support adopting the guidance, nor recommend the guidance for use by parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU. Thank you, everyone, for your interventions on that issue. It's very clear that we are able to note the guidance at this point. The debate and discussion seems to be around what happens next, and there are a variety of options from do nothing to have the Secretariat make the guidance available, and I note that guidance is for parties to take or not. It is optional in that regard. Or then at the third end of that spectrum, we may ask the Secretariat to undertake more work with the Scientific Council and with parties. So where we are right now is we have active discussion in the cross-cutting working group on this matter. I think for now we should leave it with the working group to deliberate and to try to seek clarity in terms of a way forward, in terms of where we are. If that leads to a CRP, in terms of wording solutions, which I could see there may well be, then that would be a good way forward. So my question really is to the appointed councillor taking this work forward in the working group, whether that would be an acceptable way to proceed for the foreseeable future in terms of developing a CRP and further discussion. So, Stephen?
Yes, I can attend the cross-cutting working group and we can see if we can take this forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would that be an acceptable way forward, European Union?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your summary, but I think it is important to make the distinction that we are fine to take note of the report, not to take note of the guidance. And I think several parties in the room made the same point. So also on that point, we are not convinced it is necessary to take this into a working group, because in our view, there is quite a large majority that would prefer to just take note of the report and decide that no further work is necessary, as suggested by the Scientific Council. So with that indulgence, noting that there's already a lot of work going to the working groups and that there's still time is running out, we would prefer not to send this to the working group. Thank you for that.
Thank you. EU, as I understand it, is already in the working group for discussion, and I think it's worth, given the range of views that we heard today, and there are clearly a good number of parties on, if I can put it, the other side of the argument, then I think it's worth at least having that further discussion in the working group to see if we can get a resolution on a way forward overall. But I take your point about noting the report and not the guidance at this point. Would that be an acceptable way forward? Clearly this is an issue where there are a range of differing views. I'm keen that parties have the opportunity to express these views again and to seek a consensual way forward if we can. Okay, thank you very much for that. If we can move on then, we'll await a report back from the working group on that matter. Can we move then to item 31, which is amendments of the CMS appendices, and 31.1 is taxonomy and nomenclature, and I think the Secretariat will introduce this item. Secretariat?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to introduce document 31.1 on taxonomy and nomenclature. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council and the Secretariat. The document contains 4 annexes. Annex 1 contains a recommendation from the Scientific Council that the taxonomy of aquatic mammals used by CMS should follow the official list prepared by the Society of Marine Mammalogy's Committee of Taxonomy. Annex 2 contains a recommendation on amendments to Resolution 12.27 on taxonomy and nomenclature. Annex 3 contains a draft revised annex to that same resolution, which lists the standard references. The annex is also subject to adoption by the Conference of the Parties alongside the resolution. Annex 4 contains a recommendation to task the Scientific Council to review the utility of the Catalogue of Life as a source for all taxonomic and nomenclatural information for CMS in future, and to liaise with taxonomic and/or nomenclatural advisors to other MEAs on extracting species lists by a particular date for use as standard references by these MEAs. There is also a related information document in point 31.1, which provides an excerpt from the standard reference for fish for all fish species currently listed in the appendices of CMS. In summary, the document reports in line with Resolution 12.27 on the Scientific Council review of the updated online versions of the standard references for birds and fish with respect to the species listed in the appendices. It also makes recommendations on the alignment of CMS appendices with the standard references for the respective taxa. It suggests a new taxonomic reference for marine mammals, and the document also recommends to review the utility of the Catalogue of Life as a potential source for all taxonomic and nomenclatural information for CMS in future. Therefore, in terms of the action, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to A, review the findings of the comparison of the taxonomy and nomenclature used for bird, fish, and marine mammal taxa, currently listed in CMS appendices with the relevant standard references. B, consider and adopt changes to the appendices as recommended by the Scientific Council. Adopt the draft amendments to Resolution 12.27 contained in Annex 2, including its annex provided in Annex 3 to this document. And finally, adopt the draft decision contained in Annex 4 to this document. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. Again, if I could open the floor for comments. If there are no further comments on this, then we could, recommend this paper for adoption. So the recommended actions that we would approve are: COP is recommended to review the findings of the comparisons of the taxonomy and nomenclature used for bird, fish and marine mammal taxa, currently listed in the CMS appendices, with the relevant standard references. And then B, consider and adopt changes to the appendices as recommended by the Scientific Council. And then C, adopt the draft amendments to Resolution 12.27 contained in Annex 2 of this document. And then D, adopt the draft decision contained in Annex 4 of this document. Are we content to recommend the adoption of the document? I think we are indeed. Thank you very much. Can we then move on to item 31.2, which is the disaggregation of avian families and genera listed on Appendix 2, which is document 31, Rev 1, and I think a representative from the Scientific Council will introduce this item. Scientific Council. Sorry, Stephen Garnett, are you ready to introduce the item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, under the agenda item 31.2, Scientific Council wishes to introduce the document, Doc 31.2, the disaggregation of families and genera listed in Appendix 2. This document was prepared by Scientific Council. The discussion on the document has taken place in the Avian Working Group. This document contains two annexes. Annex 1 contains guidance on the treatment of species included within aggregated families listed under Appendix 2. Annex 2 requests the Scientific Council to establish an advisory list of species within the families and genera aggregated under Appendix 2, a significant proportion of whose members cyclically and predictably cross one or more national jurisdictional boundaries and which have an unfavourable conservation status. This list would be maintained by the Scientific Council and would be reviewed and updated before each meeting of the Conference of the Parties. In summary, 63 bird families and 3 genera listed under Appendix 2 of CMS contain over 2,300 species, of which a large proportion occur in a single country, do not cyclically or predictably cross one or more national jurisdictional boundaries, and/or do not have an unfavourable conservation status. To assist parties manage their responsibilities towards species aggregated into families and genera under Appendix 2, Scientific Council established an intersessional working group on the disaggregation of higher taxa listed in Appendix 2 to consider alternative treatments to address this issue. The document reports the results of discussions of the intersessional working group, which provided reasons to recommend one of 6 alternative approaches to this issue. Therefore, in terms of the actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to adopt the draft resolution contained in Annex 1, including the list in Annex 1 of the draft resolution, adopt the draft decisions in Annex 2 of this document. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scientific Council. Again, I open the floor for comments. United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. The UK welcomes this report and thanks Scientific Council and in particular Stephen Garnett for their work in developing the paper. The UK supports the proposed option 1B, which is a pragmatic and sensible solution to resolving this complex issue. The paper has helpfully identified further possible listing proposals, which we hope relevant parties will consider for their possible listings in the future. We look forward to similar work being completed for other taxa.
Thank you, United Kingdom. If there are no other interventions, can I echo your thanks to Stephen Garnett for his work in this area. It's a hugely complex area and a fast-moving area in terms of science as well, so thank you, Stephen. If there are no other interventions, I think we could recommend this paper for adoption. So we're asked to adopt the draft resolution contained in Annex 1 of the document, including the list in Annex 1 of the draft resolution, adopt the draft decisions in Annex 2 of the document. Are we content to recommend adoption? I believe we are. There we are. So adopted. Can we move on then to item 31.3, which is potential avian taxa for listing? And again, a representative of the Scientific Council will introduce this item. Is that back to Stephen Garnett or is it Rob Clay? Stephen.
I'm just looking for my papers. I didn't think I was doing this introduction.
Let me help you out. Maybe the Secretariat could say some introductory words and then we'll come back to Scientific Council if needed. Thank you. Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, under the agenda item 13.3, Scientific Council wishes to introduce the document 13.1.3, Potential Avian Taxa for Listing. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council. The discussion on the document will take place in the Avian Working Group. This document contains two annexes. Annex 1 contains a draft resolution that proposes to endorse a list of 158 avian species that meet CMS movement criteria and have an unfavorable status, but which are not included within aggregated families and are not currently included individually in either Appendix 1 or Appendix 2 of the CMS. Annex 2 contains draft decisions. The document reports on the steps taken to apply a strategic approach to listing species that meet the criteria defined in the guidelines for preparing and assessing proposals for the amendment of CMS appendices in Resolution 13.7, so parties can prioritize the species that would most benefit from listing and cooperative conservation work under the Convention. The document highlights that the process to amend the appendices of the Convention has historically been fairly ad hoc, and that understanding which species would qualify for listing under the Convention is a first step in deciding which species would most benefit from listing and concerted actions. Therefore, in terms of the actions, the Conference of the Parties is recommended to adopt the draft resolution contained in Annex 1 of this document and to adopt the draft decisions contained in Annex 2 of this document. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Could it clarify if there are any further comments from the Scientific Council or if that introduction will cover all items?
That covers our introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that. Can I open the floor for any comments? Yeah, European Union, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The EU and its member states take note of the work done by the Scientific Council in preparing a list of avian species that meet CMS movement criteria and have an unfavorable conservation status, that are not included with aggregated families and are not currently included individually in either Appendix 1 or Appendix 2 of CMS. This is a useful exercise to assist parties in the identification of potential species to be listed and help in the evaluation of listing proposals submitted to COP. It can also guide the CMS avian family to prioritize and focus on the bird species which are in more urgent need of collaborative action. We agree with the idea that a similar exercise is undertaken by the Scientific Council for other migratory taxa, and the EU and its member states can support the adoption of the resolution and decision proposed. We have one change in the first operational paragraph, where we want to replace endorses by takes note of the list. So we have provided this to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just very briefly, we'd like to thank the Sessional Committee for their work on this issue. We note adfly petrels are on the list in the annex, and just wanted to bring your attention to the fact that New Zealand is planning to work with BirdLife and other range states potentially on a listing proposal to bring to COP15 on this issue. And we support the resolution and decision. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Bangladesh, please.
Thank you, Chair. As first time Bangladesh is taking the floor, I would like to thank the government of Uzbekistan for their warm hospitality, and at the same time would like to thank the Secretariat for organizing the COP. Bangladesh greatly appreciates the work undertaken in preparation of document UNEP CMS SCC SC6 document Doc 31.3, which has discussed at the 6th meeting of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council. This makes it simpler for parties to identify priority species that should be considered for listing under the CMS appendixes. We wish to use this opportunity to raise the point that the critically endangered musk finfoot, a unique Asian migratory species, is missing in the SCC SC6 Doc 31.3 Annex to Resolution 14.xx should be considered, including the following. The musk finfoot, this is a unique Asian migratory species which has rapidly declined to critically endangered in the most recent IUCN Red List assessment. The coastal mangroves of the Sundarbans are an important breeding area for this species and considered a priority.
Can you speak closer to the microphone? Thank you.
We wish to note that the 11th meeting of the partners of the East Asian Australasian Fellow Partnership in Brisbane, Australia in March 2023 noted the endangered status of the musk finfoot with an estimated global population of 108 to 304 mature individual and the urgent need for conservation research and management throughout its range in South and Southeast Asia. It was agreed that an additional conservation management activities are required immediately and that such work should occur to prevent the extinction of this species and develop a proposal for formation of musk finfoot task force. As Bangladesh is one of the two CMS parties in this range of this species, we prioritize this for listing in Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 of this convention. We would like to be willing to prepare such a proposal for listing in consultation with the range states, the CMS Scientific Council and other experts and stakeholders to be brought forward for consideration of the next COP. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh, and thank you for your proposal to take the action that you have outlined. Could I go then to Egypt, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. The issue of alien species is very, very complicated and is being dealt with all biodiversity-related conventions for almost 30 years now. And almost all of these conventions, they have decisions related to alien species. Why it is a problem? Because of confusion in terminology. Sometimes they call it alien, sometimes they call it exotic, sometimes they call it invasive, sometimes they call it beneficial species. It is so complicated. And that's why, as I mentioned yesterday, it is very essential that we should have terminology, that we should know what we are dealing with. Alien species in itself is not a big deal, but when it comes to be invasive species, this is a serious matter. And that's why we are in agreement with the proposal by EU on the amendment of the resolution, especially when it comes to the encloses or encages, whatever. We need one program that can fit for all of them, and each convention can have its own part of it, otherwise we'll continue on. And this is a very serious matter, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Egypt. Thank you for all these comments. I think I'm right that we only had one small suggested amendment. I wonder if the EU could perhaps repeat that, and then we could, I think, move to agree the document. EU, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We would only like to replace in the first operational paragraph of the resolution, paragraph 1 starts with endorses the list of avian species, and we would like to replace that by saying takes note of the list of avian species. That's the only change we would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. With that clarification, which is on the first operational paragraph then, which would delete the word endorse, we would replace that with takes note of, and then learning. Sorry, appointed councillor does want to comment on this now, I believe.
It is my understanding, Chair, that there is maybe an additional species that was going to be brought up in the Avian Working Group. That has not yet been discussed in the Avian Working Group. And so would it be possible to hold this over until that discussion has taken place?
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, let's do that then. If you can add in any relevant species to the document, and we'll take on board the suggested amendment from EU into the CRP. So we will produce a CRP on this document. So thank you for that. And we were so close to having number 3 approved. We'll come back to it. Thank you. So we will produce a CRP. Thank you very much. Can we then move on to item 32.1, which is on concerted actions, document 30, Rev 1, 30.1, Rev 1, and Secretariat will introduce the document. Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates. Under this agenda item, the Secretariat wishes to introduce the document UNEP CMS COP14, document 32.1, Rev 1, concerted action. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council and the Standing Committee with support by the Secretariat. The document contains one annex with draft revised resolution 12.28, concerted action. This document provides a proposal for the revision of CMS resolution 12.28, COP13, prepared by the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council at its 5th meeting, considered by the Standing Committee at its 52nd meeting, and further reviewed by the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council at its 6th meeting. The need to update Resolution 12.28 on concerted action was identified by the 10th and 11th meetings of the Conference of the Parties, when the earlier processes for concerted and cooperative actions were reviewed. In particular, COP18 decided that the 2 earlier processes be consolidated, and the discussions were continued at COP13. However, certain practical challenges have emerged which have led to the practice to diverge, in some instances from the letter of the resolution. Therefore, the 5th meeting of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council proposed revision of Resolution 1228, Rev. COP13, to be put forward to COP14 for consideration. And the 52nd meeting of the Standing Committee supported that proposal, which is now being presented to the COP for consideration, after further consideration by the 6th meeting of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council last summer. Recently, the Secretariat identified further 2 elements that might need clarification in the resolution text, which are: the first one is the need to clarify the procedure to extend an ongoing concerted action should the proponent wish the action to continue, or to close it in the absence of a proposal for its extension. Also, the second element is to amend the template for concerted action proposal, which is now provided in Annex 2 to Resolution 1228, replacing the descriptive text on activities and expected outcomes by a simpler and clearer overview in the form of a table. Mr. Chair, these comments are technical, and the Secretariat is ready to read the paragraphs in full here and introduce it in the CRP, or to present it to the working group should it be established. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Again, could I open the floor for comments? United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Chair. We agree with the proposals to revise the process of continuing or closing concerted actions added to Rev 1 of the document following consideration by the Scientific Council. In particular, to ensure lessons are learnt from actions that are closed to improve the process into the future. We also think that a new operative paragraph 3 is required to replace the one that is being deleted to ensure that the guidelines in the Annex follow through completely from the resolution. We will provide the wording to the Secretariat, or I could briefly read it as it's not very long.
Thank you, UK. I think if it's short, if you read it now, and then we will produce a CRP for clarity, but if you could read it briefly, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Chair. Recalling the proposals for concerted actions are submitted to the meetings of the COP by the proponents in the form of projects aimed at specific species listed in the appendices, which often cover only part of the range of the species concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. If you could send that to Secretariat, we will produce a CRP and bring it back for your consideration in due course. Thank you very much for that. If we could then move on to document 32.2, which is assessment of progress in the implementation of concerted actions and possible proposals for their extension, document 32.2, and again, Secretariat will introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates. Under this agenda item, the Secretariat wishes to introduce the document UNEP CMS COP14, document 32.2, assessment of progress in the implementation of concerted actions and possible proposals for their extension. The document was prepared by the Secretariat. This document does not contain any annexes. The document summarizes the status of reporting on the implementation of ongoing concerted actions. The Conference of Parties is expected to review progress in the implementation of concerted actions and take decisions concerning the continuation of concerted actions still to be completed, including any modifications to the original concerted action proposals. Through Resolution 1228, COP12 decided to review at each meeting of the COP progress in implementing concerted actions in accordance with the guidelines to the implementation of the concerted action process contained in Annex 1 to the resolution, and on the basis of a report on implementation by the proponents of the respective proposals for concerted actions. The reports received are presented to COP as documents UNEP CMS COP14, document 32.2.1, until the document 32.2.7 and are accompanied by comments by the Scientific Council contained in document UNEP CMS COP14, document 32.3.7 addendum. Paragraph 8 of the document contains an overview of 8 concerted actions for which no report was received, and the COP14 is now invited to propose the way forward. As the Secretariat, we suggest that the COP could consider to close these concerted actions for which no report was received, unless extension is proposed by their proponents. Therefore, Mr. Chair, in terms of the action, the Conference of Parties is recommended to review progress in the implementation of concerted actions as reported in documents UNEP CMS COP14, documents 32.21 until 7, and then to take a decision concerning the continuation of concerted actions still to be completed, including any modifications to the original concerted action proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. This is an important aspect of work for the Convention in terms of working with parties and others to improve the status of migratory species in particular. Could I open the floor for any comments? We are asked to make a decision in terms of whether to continue the listed conservation actions or close those listed in paragraph 8 in particular. Thank you for your patience while we consulted. We are being asked to make a decision in here about the continuation or otherwise of the concerted actions listed in paragraph 8. If there are no comments on the concerted actions listed in paragraph 8, then the proposal is that we bring these concerted actions to an end at this point, and then in future COPs there could of course be new concerted actions taken forward. But that would be the proposal. What we would do in terms of the paper would be develop a CRP that would indicate that as the decision to come back to us, to the committee, for further consideration and recommendation or otherwise. Would that be an acceptable way forward? So we produce a CRP indicating that the concerted actions would come to an end. Thank you. Further consultation with the Secretariat. The proposal is that we would note the decision not to continue these concerted actions in the meeting report, and I would then ask you now to agree the recommended actions. So would that be an acceptable way forward? In which case, we will move this to recommend adoption. So the Conference of the Parties is recommended to review progress in the implementation of concerted actions as reported in document 14 doc 32.2x, and then B, we've taken a decision concerning the continuation of the concerted action still to be completed, including any modifications to the original concerted action. So can we ask you to agree to adoption on that? We can indeed. So there, done. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for that. That then takes us on to aquatic species conservation issues, and 27.1 is fisheries-induced threats. And I'd like to begin before lunch, if the appropriate appointed councillor is ready, to introduce item 27.1.1, which is bycatch. And I believe the appointed councillor for bycatch will introduce this document. Thank you. Appointed councillor, you having a microphone problem? Yeah. Try again.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce document 27.1.1, Rev 1 on bycatch. This document was prepared by the Scientific Council and the Secretariat. It reports on progress on the implementation of decisions 13.61 to 13.63 on bycatch. The document contains 3 annexes. Annex 1 contains a review of existing technical mitigation techniques to reduce the bycatch of sharks. This document was prepared by a colleague of mine, David Drynan, and myself. Annex 2 contains a summary and recommendations from that particular study. And Annex 3 contains draft decisions directed to parties, the Scientific Council and the Secretariat. These propose actions for marine mammals, marine turtles and sharks and rays. The review on technical mitigation for sharks highlights that mitigating shark bycatch is an extremely complex problem that no single technique is going to solve. Solutions need to account for species specificity, be tailored to individual fisheries and their management frameworks and objectives, account for interactions between mitigation strategies and unintended impacts, and make trade-offs between maintaining target catch and minimising bycatch. Prioritising detailed data collection on shark movements and life histories and involving the fishing industry is crucial for developing effective bycatch mitigation strategies. Parts of Decision 13.62A have not been implemented, specifically with respect to the review of current data and knowledge about levels of bycatch of CMS-listed sharks and ray species. Parts of Decision 13.63B could not be implemented as reported data on bycatch are often difficult to compare. This is because the term bycatch is not consistently defined and reporting standards differ between countries and organisations. An analysis of current levels of bycatch based on available data is hence complicated and might lead to false results. The inconsistent definitions and reporting standards for bycatch make it difficult to compare data, and bycatch alone does not capture the full extent of fishing-related mortality. For these reasons, in the draft decisions, a new approach is therefore proposed to review and critically assess the overall impact of all fisheries-induced mortality on shark and ray populations, including landings, bycatch, dead discards and post-release mortality. Regarding cetaceans, it is proposed in the draft decisions that parties take account of the FAO technical guidelines to prevent and reduce bycatch of marine mammals. In addition, parties that are range states to the critically endangered Baltic proper harbour porpoise are requested to urgently implement time-bound action plans and measures for effective bycatch mitigation. To address the bycatch of sea turtles, the decisions propose developing an overview of the status of knowledge regarding bycatch reduction and mitigation. Therefore, the Conference of Parties is recommended to note the report contained in Annex 1 of this document, note the recommendations as contained in Annex 2 of this document, adopt the draft resolutions as contained in Annex 3, and delete decisions 13.61 to 13.63. I'd like to note that the discussion on the document has taken place in the Aquatic Working Group, and we envisage a CRP will be shortly available on this agenda item. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Again, I'd open the floor, noting that there will be a CRP on the way. So any comments on bycatch? Yes, Ocean Care, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ocean Care strongly supports the adoption of the draft decisions. In particular, we would like to highlight the importance of Decision 14BB, which is directed to parties that are range states of the Baltic proper harbour porpoise, requesting them to urgently implement time-bound action plans and measures for effective bycatch mitigation. Such conservation action is essential to protect this critically endangered population. We also acknowledge the important work going on through Azkabans to address this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ocean Care. And Egypt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similarly, Egypt would like to thank the Secretariat and on the document itself and endorse that documentation. However, the issue of bycatch is very, very difficult, and that's why perhaps for the third or fourth time now I'm calling for a proper definition. We need CMS to have proper definition for what we are doing or what we want to do, otherwise we'll not be able to implement them. This is not only the definition, but the way how all of these technical mitigation measures and the different annexes itself, it is very complicated as well because we don't know what we are expected to do. Are we dealing with sharks and rays or turtles or marine mammals or what? And again, you still have FAOs doing more or less similar work and other conventions as well. And that's why synergies among biodiversity-related conventions and other MEAs are necessary to a way that whatever we agree upon is also agreed on other conventions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Egypt, for that helpful point. Senegal, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. We strongly support this decision on bycatch. As you know, bycatch in fisheries are recognized as a major mortality factor for many marine species, including cetaceans and marine turtles. Techniques to reduce bycatch are multiple and are in many cases difficult to apply. In our case, we carried out an experiment in Senegal with lead lamps, which enabled us to have some initial results. We used them with fishing nets in areas surrounding MPAs in order to see if we could reduce the rate of bycatch using lamp leads. And the first results have been very interesting and encouraging, with a 75% reduction rate in terms of bycatch of turtles and over 75% for sharks. This is an experiment which we intend to repeat. We have carried out 3 attempts for the time being. We believe it's important to test techniques and to see what works, because this is a major issue, and it means that marine species are very vulnerable to bycatchers. So we need to carry out experiments and see what works and what doesn't in order to achieve interesting results. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. Can we move to Cook Islands, then Nigeria, and I will close after Nigeria. So Cook Islands.
Thank you, Chair. Cook Islands acknowledges the unintended bycatch during fishing operation is an important and ongoing issue, and I wish to highlight areas where Cook Island has provisions of or legislation to reduce these issues. In 2012, we legislated a shark regulation that prohibits the landing of any sharks captured in the Cook Islands EEZ, continuous zone and territorial waters, and applies to any licensed Cook Island vessel or chartered vessel fishing within our waters. Fishing for any capture of shark or the removal of shark fins is prohibited, and no one may transship, process, or trade in sharks or shark fins. Cook Island is an active member of the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission that has adopted multiple conservation and management measures aimed at reducing unintended interaction with cetacean, whale sharks, seabirds, and turtles. Importantly, the compliance with these conservation management measures is monitored on an annual basis. Our Fisheries Observer Program monitors bycatch interaction and mitigation practices. Any infringements are identified and can lead to penalties or prosecution of the offender in serious cases. In addition, safe handling guidelines to increase the chance of survival when animals are returned to the sea have been produced for sharks and whale sharks and are provided at all vessels when they obtain a license to fish under the Cook Islands flag. Finally, the Cook Island does not support the CMS developing decisions to include fishing license conditions, as this is the domain of the National Fisheries Administration. CMS should maintain the use of voluntary language such as request to in any decision outcomes, noting that bycatch management is based on the scientific compliance information that is fishery and content specific. Additionally, fishery-specific measures must be applied through relevant regional fisheries management organization. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cook Islands. And then finally, Nigeria, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nigeria would like to note that the discussion on bycatch cannot be complete without the discussion on illegal and unregulated fishing, because the report on bycatch is usually not complete if we don't have, if we have people or we have vessels that are illegally fishing in waters, especially in national waters that happens along the coast of Guinea and so on. So it's very important that the issues of bycatch is looked at with the issues of unregulated illegal fishing that happens along waters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all these comments. As noted by the appointed councillor, there is a CRP in production. So we will have another discussion on this matter when that comes back to the committee. Thank you all very much indeed for that. I suggest we now take a break for lunch, and if I could check if there's any announcement from Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple quick announcements. First, a reminder that the informal group meeting to discuss COP-appointed councillors is meeting now, as soon as we break, in the SIGA room, and then the institutional and cross-cutting working group meeting in the Hungel room will take up the following 4 issues this lunch period: 30.3.1 on infrastructure, 30.2.2 on transfrontier conservation areas, 30.4.5 on plastic pollution, and 24 on national legislation. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, one more announcement from Secretariat.
Yeah. National legislation will not take place at the lunch.
break. We'll let you know when it's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Thank you, everyone. We will resume at 3 o'clock. Thank you.